So this is formally my 50th episode. Actually, it's the 54th, but it does have the number 50. So I thought I'd have some kind of special episode, a coruscating and scintillating episode full of wit and light and insight. But then I decided to do this instead. They were beginning to get just a bit ticked off at having to pay for all those mercenaries to eat croissant and discuss philosophy in French rural cafes.
Nicholas Bremborough demonstrated that once you face down the fishmongers, you have nothing more to fear from life or indeed to achieve. Stratford dug his heels in. If this had been the 60s, he'd have waved a placard above his head, sung "We Shall Not Be Moved," and quite probably produced some magic mushrooms. Aristotle, for example. Now, you may have a negative view of the man if you've heard that Aristotle was a bugger for the bottle, but in point of fact, in Aristotle, Henry had confined his doubts only to Wolsey, and Wolsey was not a happy bunny. He was not a happy bunny. Not a happy bunny. Not a happy bunny. Not a happy bunny. Not a happy bunny.
There have been few bunnies less happy than John on hearing from his agents in Rome that some bloke called Reggie might be his Archbishop.
Livid, hopping mad, a bunny most unhappy. In fact, it turns out he was not a happy bunny at all when he saw Balliol and a bunch of hairy English archers turn up in his hood. I warble. Henry VIII never had any chance whatsoever of being elected. And actually, probably Francis I didn't either, though we spent so much money trying that even Sepp Blatter and Michel Platini would have been impressed. Joke! Lol. Henry seems to have been sensible enough to have had an attack of the giggles when he heard of the plan. Presumably when the papal envoy mentioned Abyssinia, he thought he was just off somewhere. Abyssinia. See? Anyway,
The Wilton Diptych is one of England's most celebrated paintings. Not to be confused with the Wilton Dipstick, by the way. Who's that bloke you might meet in the Swan pub in Wilton?
How can a wardrobe be insolvent? Never met one with a bank account, and why should that worry anyone anyway? I have no idea if sausage was one of them, but I do hope it was. You can't beat a nice sausage. It spoils the flavour. No idea why I'm talking about sausages, and I offer you my formal apology.
Nestled up against the Pyrenees, and therefore just above the Pyreankles.
The water-powered blast furnace, the porter-wowered fast blurness.
Let's say that one more time. Nibbly green. Nibbly, nibbly, nibbly.
I imagine you are wondering why on earth I'm telling you all this. And if in fact you have managed to download the wrong podcast created by some gibbering idiot.
I don't know the answer, of course, being simply a bloke in a shed. I must remember to stop drinking all that gold I have lying around the shed. Anyway, I digress. I'm going to stop now, since I suspect all this description of partying could get tiresome. But let's summarise a bit, and try to make a few serious, po-faced points, as though I were a proper historian, rather than a purveyor of tittle-tattle, as it is increasingly beginning to appear. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, hey, I thought the English crown was destitute, didn't have two beans to rub together, and now here they are, wandering up and down the River Seine with the big army, eating bonbons and beating up the French. And not because they deserve it, the guy just hangs around at court eating bonbons.
Eating bonbons, eating bonbons.
Eating bonbons. And they're all sat around eating bonbons, getting dysentery and bankrupting the kingdom.
I was wildly excited to get an email telling me that I have been nominated for the massively prestigious European Podcast Award. You can only guess at the excitement when I told the rest of my family. The dog wagged his tail and wondered if the European podcast was something he could eat. One of my daughters informed me that in certain circles I could be considered to be a loser. The other daughter gave me a look that led me to understand that she could be part of one of those circles. But sadly for poor old William, he was to be tested again before he and his boys could finally chillax, as my daughter might hideously say.
So, my daughter wandered by the other day, and in a moment of the deepest boredom, decided that it might be worth giving a chat with Dad a bit of a go.
They are wicked and willy in their actions.
No, they're not. They're wicked and wily in their actions.
Well, same difference. Okay.
Okay.
You guys are way too willy. Okay. They are wicked and wily in their actions.
Not for nothing was he called Wiley Winchester. What a card, eh? I can just see Warwick's face when he heard the news. I can imagine he did some whiffling through Tolgee Woods, and more than his fair share of burbling to boot. And true enough, Edward drew his dagger, and he held it to Elizabeth's throat, which is a common technique on Butchergate in Carlisle on a Saturday night, along with a romantic compliment, "You don't sweat much for a fat lass." Henry's men were waiting in the sand dunes. Hopefully, they didn't have to eat cold, hard-boiled eggs covered in a faint dusting of sand, which is my abiding memory of sitting in sand dunes. Thomas Wrottesley was beside himself when he heard. There was all kind of fist-pumping, egg-laying and having of kittens going on. "I'll have her arrested tomorrow, as agreed with the king, in front of the king and the court. Trust me, Stockfish," said Wrottesley. "Great," said Gardiner, "but stop calling me Stockfish." Either way, this bill of accusations against Catherine was brought to her, and she panicked. And look, it was a good time to panic. I panic if I run out of tea bags, let alone being threatened with heresy. The Catholics say this while spitting and waving their fists, the Prots saying it while giving a dance of joy, a few fist pumps, and the odd leap into the air while doing that fiddly sort of thing with feet and ankles that ballet and river dancers do.
So he put the Batmobile into Angevin wriggling mode straight away.
By the autumn, he'd spotted opportunities to follow a wedgie policy. I don't mean by this that he went around unexpectedly pulling up his opponent's pants, though that is a delightful
Thomas
image.
Wyatt, I suspect, could hardly stub a toe without writing a sonnet about how stubby and toe-like it had all been.
If they are taken, that is, Henry and Margaret, then that kingdom may be considered settled and quiet under King Edward and the Earl of Warwick. And then, as they are well affected to the Dauphin and the Duke of Burgundy, it seems likely they will pursue the plan to pass to France. I have observed the great importance that the Duke of Burgundy attaches to England. Thus he has kept in with the Earl of Warwick, and his son, never doing this again, with the Queen of England, so that whatever happens...
Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Why doesn't this bloke get on with it? First, he uses some feeble excuse to warble on about Outremer, now it's the absurdly potted history of Europe. I'm going to listen to Ray Harris, he's good, or stick with Mike, he's brilliant. Goodbye, history of England. So long.
Is this good stuff, by the way? Answers on a postcard to the shed. Anyway, when I was a lad, I spent a fair proportion of my life reading science fiction books about how we were all going to blast off to the stars. And so I did my level best to choose all the scientists so I could go with them. Until some sensible teacher kindly explained that since my chemistry and physics marks were so small they needed an electron microscope to read them, maybe I'd better concentrate a bit more on the arts. And so here we all are, years later with the History Podcast. You might well then ask, why on earth am I sharing this piece of frankly irrelevant information? And the answer is I don't know. Except to labour the point that when I tell you something technological, handle it with care.
Digression alert. Let's call this particular Alexius Merzophilus, because that was his nickname. So called because his eyebrows were hairy and met in the middle. If you have any friends whose eyebrows are hairy and meet in the middle, you might like to call them Merzophilus from now on. He also spent much of his youth in England. He shall be known as Diego. No, he won't. He'll be referred to as the Earl of Lennox, for such was his name. I have had her by the... And at this point, gentle listeners, Mr. Mannix used a word almost as bad as Belgium. I speak of the thermonuclear word, which is an Anglo-Saxon one, first attested in 1230, by the way, used to describe the female genitalia. I shall not use this word, since this is a family show. Or at least I have some evidence of people have forced their weeping children to listen. Bloody Oxford, really, full of eggheads who can't even call their prisons something simple and grim like Wormwood Scrubs. Carried out with Philip's representative, the Count of Egmont. As such, it could be described as the Egmont Overture. That is a most amusing, if slightly pretentious, joke. Thank you. I am here all week. That, gentle listeners, is the end of the History of England. Good luck, everyone, and have a great life. As it happens, it was not the end to it. It was not the beginning of the end, and in fact, it wasn't even the end of the beginning. Not to labour the point too much, it was in fact just the plain old beginning.
Bloody dog.